Kayla Tausche is outside USTR. Going to be a very full day of coverage. Kayla, good morning.
Good morning, Carl. We just saw the reception outside the U.S. Trade Representative's office of the Vice Premier of China. He was received by the U.S. Trade Representative and the Treasury Secretary. They all put on a good face. It was a congenial greeting, smiles, back pats, posing for a photo op for the media that is assembled for the most suspenseful moment in this protracted trade dispute on U.S. soil that I can remember. You've had the truces in Buenos Aires and in Osaka, Japan, but this is really a critical moment here in this dispute because you have the specter of tariffs going up next Tuesday. You have the mid-December tariffs on a wide variety of consumer goods that many principals on the U.S. side believe would be incredibly damaging to the economy. And then you have both sides essentially throwing a whole lot of options against the wall via the press to really set a crowded negotiating table and show the other side maybe what they're willing to do and what they're not willing to do to telegraph their position ahead of these talks. What we do know, the president hasn't made up his mind. A senior administration official told me that last night, despite all of what we've learned about China's position, about the U.S. position in recent days. David, you mentioned that it's become confusing for investors to follow this back and forth. It's become confusing to reporters as well. Last night, when Chinese media was reporting that the delegation could cut its trip early, the White House had no idea. Administration officials were still saying it would go through Friday. There would be a fancy dinner tonight, signaling that talks were expected to be robust and go well. And then that changed tune in the space of about an hour, with a principal in talks telling CNBC the situation is fluid. Whether they extend till tomorrow is an open question. We know the Chinese have played this game before. They have used the idea that they could cut talks early if they're not going well, or extend them if they feel they're productive, as a way to entice the U.S. side to put more on the table. We'll see what happens today. Of course, we wish we could be a fly on the wall in the negotiating room, but we'll rely on our reporting and what information we can get in the meantime. Guys?
Kayla, you mentioned, of course, the difficulty in trying to understand what might transpire. You bring up the president as well. I mean, he's clearly a wild card here because he can make a decision that perhaps is at odds even with the negotiators in the room. Isn't that right?
That is exactly right. And it's unclear exactly where his mindset is right now. 3 weeks ago, he said he would not do a partial deal. He would not seek agricultural purchases as part of an interim deal. He didn't want a mini deal. And then just a few days later, he asked his Treasury Secretary, why didn't they buy agriculture? Why didn't we do that again? I thought we wanted them to do that. And a lot of officials that I speak to say that maybe the devil is really in the marketing, how you build this to President Trump, maybe not as a mini deal or an interim deal, if that is what's on the table and what the two sides are discussing, but as a mile marker, as a point of progress, as a way to temporarily pause the dispute and make sure that there are dates in the future where China can be held accountable and ways that the U.S. can retain leverage over China in that way. Yes, the marketing, I think, to the president has been a challenge from officials up until this point, and we're not sure at this point exactly where the president is on this, except that he has not made up his mind as of last night.
Kayla, Jim, one of the things that I'm confounded by is that there is a hardcore list from Peter Navarro. 7 things that have to happen before there's going to be any progress with the talks. We know a lot of it has to do with intellectual property. Some of it has to do with fentanyl, state-subsidized institutions. Doesn't the president subscribe to the 7 deadly sins as a reason that if you don't check off one of them, there's not going to be a big deal?
He certainly has in the past, Jim, but the question is whether the landscape for the president has changed, whether the agita from the impeachment inquiry, whether the looming election and caucuses in Iowa just a few months away, whether hearing from his agriculture secretary, who has been out on the road in the Midwest at these town halls where farmers are incredibly angry about their dire financial situation, whether those messages are overpowering Navarro's 7 deadly sins. That is the question for the president at this point, what he feels the calculus is that he needs to make at this exact moment in time, given the election, given the state of the American economy, and the fact that some of his officials, including Larry Kudlow just last week, said we're concerned about manufacturing. We don't see a recession in sight, but we're concerned about some of this data.
Yeah, Kayla, even as we're speaking to you, and we saw that arrival, South China Morning Post Of course, one of the media outlets that we watch in relation to these trade talks says dim prospects for deal. As China and U.S. resume talks, we're going to have to take all of this into consideration, as well as your reporting, Kayla, which has been exemplary. We'll come back to you a lot today. Kayla Tausche, outside USTR.